Have you ever felt your chest tighten with a simmering, helpless anger when facing big corporations? Imagine this. You are buying a plane ticket. You watch the price dance wildly on your screen after just a few minutes of hitting refresh. You ask yourself, why is it that for the same distance, on the same airline, the person sitting right next to you paid half of what you did? Or more painfully, think about the regulations enacted under the guise of consumer protection. We are told that taxi licensing is to ensure passenger safety. We are told that high import tariffs are to protect fledgling domestic industries. We nod along, trusting in the benevolence of lawmakers. But then, deep in the recesses of your mind, a small but steely voice speaks up. If the rules are meant to protect me, why is everything getting more expensive? Why do big corporations keep getting bigger while small businesses die young? That is not paranoid cynicism. That is your economic intuition screaming. And in 1982, the Nobel Committee awarded the most prestigious prize on the planet to a man who proved that your skeptical intuition was entirely correct. His name was George Stigler, and he didn't come to comfort you. He came to tell you the game was rigged before the opening whistle even blew. Do you feel a shiver? That feeling of realizing your disadvantages aren't due to bad luck, but by design? Hold on to that righteous anger. We're going to need it.
Before stepping into Stigler's cold world, we must pull back the curtain slightly on the stage he stood upon, the Nobel Prize in Economics. There is a backstage secret that few outsiders know, but it is excellent fuel for conspiracy theorists. The Nobel Prize in Economics is not actually a Nobel Prize. In Alfred Nobel's 1895 will, the father of dynamite, he only dedicated his fortune to physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, and peace. Economics was not on that list. It wasn't until 1968 that the Swedish central bank, Sveriges Riksbank, to celebrate its 300th anniversary, used its own funds to establish this award in memory of Alfred Nobel. Why does this detail matter? Because it reflects the very insecurity of the economics profession. Economists have always yearned to be taken as seriously as physicists. They wanted to prove that human behavior, chaotic, filled with greed and fear, could also be measured, predicted, and controlled by cold mathematical formulas. And George Stigler, the 1982 laureate, was the perfect embodiment of the effort to scientize that chaos. He was a giant, quite literally, standing nearly 2 meters tall, of the Chicago School, the sanctuary of the free market. But unlike his close friend Milton Friedman, a passionate evangelist, often seen on TV preaching about freedom, Stigler was more like a forensic surgeon. He was stoic, sharp, and possessed a dry, ruthless wit. He didn't care about how the world should work. He only cared about how the world actually works. And what he found when dissecting the body of public policy was a malignant tumor that we still mistake for medicine. Do you dare to look straight at the naked truth, or would you rather continue living in the comfortable illusion that the state always knows best?
Let's travel back to the mid-20th century. At that time, the Western world, especially after the Great Depression and World War II, was immersed in a romantic belief. Government is the Messiah. People believed that the free market was a wild beast that needed taming. Left to their own devices, businesses would create monopolies, exploit labor, and destroy the environment. Therefore, we needed watchmen, diligent, selfless public servants who would enact rules to curb capitalist greed and protect the public interest. Sounds soothing, doesn't it? It strokes our sense of safety. It gives us something to cling to. But George Stigler sneered at that. As a scholar at the University of Chicago, Stigler possessed an intellect as sharp as a razor and zero tolerance for naivety. There is an anecdote that when a student submitted an essay filled with flowery language about social responsibility, Stigler returned it with a single note: "Are you writing a fantasy novel?" For Stigler, there was no such thing as an abstract public interest. There were only individuals and interest groups maximizing their own utility. And the most terrifying thing he pointed out is that politicians and bureaucrats are humans too. They are not saints. They respond to incentives exactly like a fishmonger or a bank executive. What do they want? They want votes. They want power. They want bigger budgets. And who can give them those things? Not the general public, which is vast but scattered, where each person only loses a few pennies, but the small, wealthy, and tightly organized interest groups. This is where Stigler plants a seed of existential dread in us. He prepared to present a theory that would completely upend how you view every newspaper and every news broadcast from now on. He called it the theory of economic regulation, or as it later became known by a more chilling name, regulatory capture. But before diving into that dark mechanism, ask yourself, why must you pass exams to get a license for seemingly harmless jobs? Why is importing certain goods so difficult? The answer lies not in your safety. The answer lies in someone's wallet. The truth is about to be revealed. Are you ready to see that the guardian you trust is actually in bed with the very people they are supposed to be watching?
Before Stigler, the world viewed the relationship between government and business like this. Business, the unruly, greedy troublemaker. Government, the strict police officer, wielding a baton to punish the troublemaker. But in 1971, in his earth-shattering paper, The Theory of Economic Regulation, Stigler flipped the board. He proposed a thesis that stunned the academic world. Regulation is not thrust upon business. Regulation is actively sought by business. Read that again. Why would a business want to be controlled? Why would they want more licenses, more standards, more inspections? Are they masochistic? No. Stigler pointed out regulation is a commodity, and like any other commodity in the market, it is bought and sold. Supply, politicians and political parties, they hold the public power to enact laws. They sell this power in exchange for votes and campaign contributions. Demand, industries, they use money and influence to buy regulations that benefit them. And what are they buying? They aren't buying freedom. They are buying protection. They are buying barriers to entry to prevent new competitors from jumping into the market. Do you feel a sense of intellectual superiority realizing this? Suddenly, everything becomes logical. Why do traditional taxi companies protest for stricter management of Uber or Grab? Not because they care about your safety, they are demanding the government sell them the monopoly they are used to enjoying.
By now, you might be furiously asking, why do we, the vast public, let this happen? Why don't we vote to kick these sellouts out? Let's do a simple math problem, something Stigler loved. Suppose the sugar industry wants the government to impose import tariffs on sugar so they can sell at a higher price. If this law passes, the sugar tycoons pocket an extra $100 million. The U.S. population is 300 million. To cover that $100 million, each citizen has to pay an extra 33 cents for sugar over an entire year. Now, look at the incentives. The sugar tycoons, they're willing to spend $10 million, even $50 million, to hire lawyers, lobby, and take congressmen out to dinner. Because the return is massive, $100 million. You, the consumer, will you spend time researching tax laws, writing protest letters, or marching in the streets to save 33 cents? Of course not. The cost for you to fight is far higher than the money you lose. The result? The small group, business, always beats the large group, public, not because they are right, but because they have concentrated incentives. This is the fatalism of economics. You lose not because you are weak, but because the structure of the game makes your resistance economically irrational. You are starting to see the matrix now. Those convoluted regulations, those absurd taxes, they aren't system bugs, they are features.
Stigler didn't just talk. He was a pioneer in using statistical data to test legal theories, a field later known as law and economics. Before Stigler, people believed the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, created in the 1930s, helped make the market more transparent and better protected investors. What did Stigler do? He collected stock price data of new issues, IPO, before and after the SEC was created. He ran complex regression models. The result? No significant difference. Investors did not receive better returns or lower risks thanks to SEC regulations. The only thing that changed was that the cost of listing a company skyrocketed, preventing small companies from going public, leaving the playground to the giants. His work on electricity rates showed the same thing. States with electricity regulators did not have lower rates than states without them. Stigler proved that regulators eventually get captured by the very industry they regulate. This phenomenon creates what is called the revolving door. Mr. A is a bank CEO. Mr. A is appointed head of the banking oversight agency to utilize his experience. Mr. A enacts laws beneficial to his old bank or ignores violations. Term ends, Mr. A returns to be a senior advisor for the bank with $1 million salary. This isn't corruption in the sense of handing envelopes under the table. This is systemic rot, legalized, public, and happening daily right before our eyes. Does this feeling of enlightenment come with a bitter aftertaste? When you realize whose interests the expert on TV is protecting, you will never look at the world the same way again.
Look at Silicon Valley today. What do you see? You see the CEOs of the biggest tech corporations on the planet, those holding the keys to AI, social media, and the data of billions standing before Congress saying, "Please regulate us. AI is too dangerous. We need strict rules." The public applauds. Wow, they are so socially responsible. They care about the survival of humanity. But if George Stigler were alive, he would take a drag of his cigar and give a dry laugh. He would whisper in your ear, "Look closer." Applying Stigler's regulatory capture lens, you see a completely different picture. What is the cost of complying with AI safety regulations and strict data privacy standards? Hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars. Google, Microsoft, Meta, they have the cash to pay this. It's pocket change compared to the revenue. An AI startup of 3 geniuses in a garage, where will they get $10 million to hire a team of lawyers and compliance experts? So what does AI regulation actually do? It builds a massive economic moat. It locks the door, preventing any new challengers from entering the playground. Those pleas for regulation are in reality strategic moves to lock in monopoly status. Stigler taught us, when an industry matures, it stops competing with products and starts competing with laws. Your personalized fear about AI is real, but that fear is being weaponized to protect the profits of the very people creating it. Do you see how small you are?
Besides the theory of regulation, Stigler won the Nobel for another monumental insight: the economics of information. Before 1961, economists assumed that in a perfect market, everyone knew the price of everything. If Store A sold something for more than Store B, no one would buy from Store A. Prices would automatically equalize. Stigler said, wrong. Information is a scarce resource. To know the price, you have to incur search costs. You have to travel, make calls, look things up. Because searching is costly, you often accept a good enough price instead of the best price. Price dispersion is a measure of ignorance. Today, you have Google, Amazon, and price comparison sites. You think search costs have dropped to zero and you are the smartest consumer in history? Think again. Stigler would point out that in the digital age, information is no longer scarce, but it is polluted with noise. You search for flight tickets online. Algorithms know you are looking. They use cookies to track you. The next time you return, the price is ticked up slightly. That is price discrimination based on your search history. You see thousands of 5-star reviews. How many are real and how many are bots? The search cost of the past was the gas money to drive around. The search cost of today is cognitive exhaustion. You are drowned in a sea of mixed real and fake information until you give up and click Buy Now on the first result, which is usually a paid advertisement. The market hasn't become more perfect, it has just become more sophisticated in exploiting the limits of your brain.
We are living in a world where the line between state and private is increasingly blurred. Why are tax codes often thousands of pages long with incomprehensible language? So that only large corporations with armies of accountants can find the loopholes to avoid taxes. Why are banking regulations, like Basel III, insanely complex? So that small banks cannot comply and are forced to merge into big banks. Stiegler warned us, never believe a policy is good just because its name sounds good. Always ask, cui bono? Who benefits? When you see a policy banning imports to protect public health, check which domestic corporation produces that item. When you see regulations banning Airbnb to protect urban planning, check how much the hotel lobby donated to city council members. You are not being paranoid. You are just seeing the world through George Stiegler's lens. Righteous anger is rising within you, isn't it? You realize you aren't just playing a hard game, but a rigged game. But don't despair yet. Understanding the rules is the first step to not being a pawn. After reading about George Stiegler, your first natural reaction might be fatalism. You might think, if everything is bought, if the government is captured, then why should I try? I'm just a speck of dust. But Stiegler didn't write these things to make you give up. He wrote them so you would stop being a victim. The biggest lesson from the 1982 Nobel Prize is not that everyone is evil, but that everyone responds to incentives. If you understand incentives, you can predict behavior and protect yourself. Equip yourself with a filter named cui bono, who benefits. Every time you read the news, hear a campaign promise, or see a new policy, stop for 3 seconds and run Stiegler's 3-step process. 1. Ignore moral language. Strip away the tear-jerking words like for the community, protecting the future, or social justice. Those are just sugarcoating. 2. Follow the money. From whose pocket to whose pocket will this policy transfer money? Who gets richer because of it? 3. Look for barriers. Who does this policy hinder? Which competitor is it preventing from entering the market? Real-world example. When you see traditional taxi companies lobbying for Grab or Uber to install expensive equipment to ensure safety. The naive, oh, that's good, safer for me. The Stieglerian thinker, entry costs rise, fewer drivers, fares rise. Old taxi firms keep market share. I am the one paying for that unnecessary safety. When you start viewing the world this way, you shift from feeling deceived to feeling insightful. Intellectual superiority. You are no longer a sheep to be herded. You are an awake observer. Stiegler coined the concept of rational ignorance, meaning that learning deeply about politics or economics is too costly compared to the benefit it brings to you personally. But in the 21st century, the price of ignorance has become too high. If you don't understand the rules of the game, you will be fleeced. Inflation is not a natural disaster. It is a hidden tax the government uses to reduce its public debt by diluting the value of your savings. Real estate bubbles are often nurtured by low interest rate policies to boost short-term GDP figures, helping politicians get re-elected regardless of long-term consequences. The survival strategy here is to switch from rational ignorance to active skepticism. You don't need to be an economics professor. You just need to stop blindly trusting experts paid by interest groups. Remember the famous saying, though not Stiegler's, it fits his spirit perfectly, if you aren't paying for the product, you are the product. In political economy, this is even more brutal. If you aren't at the table negotiating the budget pie, you are on the menu. We tend to blame individuals. If we just elected a better leader, things would be different. If that CEO were more ethical, the company wouldn't do bad things. Stiegler would throw a bucket of ice water in your face. The problem is the system, not the people. If you put a good person into a system with perverse incentives, that good person will either be corrupted or eliminated. If the system rewards doctors based on the volume of prescriptions, doctors will prescribe more drugs than necessary, even if they are good people. If the election system depends on funding, politicians will serve donors instead of voters, no matter how dedicated they are.
This liberates you from useless personal outrage. Don't hate the player, hate the game. And more importantly, look for better games for your life. Seek out decentralized markets, where power is not concentrated in the hands of a small group of easily captured watchmen. This truth might make you feel lonely, but it also brings freedom. You no longer wait for a messiah to come and rescue the economy. You realize the only person with a real incentive to protect your interests is you.
When Alfred Nobel wrote his will, he wanted to honor those who conferred the greatest benefit to humankind. George Stigler is perhaps a strange exception. He didn't invent a life-saving vaccine, didn't write poetry that moved the soul, and certainly didn't bring peace to our minds. On the contrary, Stigler stripped humanity of something very precious: political innocence. Before Stigler, we were like children believing in Santa Claus. We believed that in Washington, London, or any capital, there were benevolent father figures staying up all night worrying about our happiness. After Stigler, we were forced to grow up. We were forced to see the political machine naked, gears grinding against each other, lubricated by money and votes, operating not on love but on the friction of self-interest. It is a painful loss. It feels like the first time you realized your parents had fears, petty calculations, and ordinary flaws. The idol crumbled. But remember the feeling after that pain. It is freedom. When you stop expecting your parents to be saints, you start loving them as humans. When you stop expecting the state to be the messiah, you start learning to drive your own life. Stigler was not a cynic who wanted to destroy the world. He was a realist who wanted to save us from the crushing disappointment of misplaced faith. The truth hurts, but the truth sets you free. You no longer feel betrayed when a policy fails. You just nod. As predicted, their incentive was X, so the result is Y. That is the serenity of intellect.
Stigler's legacy doesn't just lie in dusty textbooks. It lives on in the concept of the iron triangle, the durable symbiotic relationship between interest groups, business, provide campaign funds. Congress, politicians, enact laws and budgets. Bureaucracy, regulators, enforce laws and grant privileges. This triangle is as hard as steel, and it will crush any single individual trying to stand in its way with empty moral appeals. Stigler's final warning for the 21st century is: never let economic power and political power sleep in the same bed for too long. When the government intervenes too deeply in the economy, business will stop focusing on innovation because it's risky. Instead, they will invest in politics because it's safer and yields higher returns. We will see the rise of a class of political entrepreneurs, those who get rich not by creating better products for you, but by lobbying for monopolies. Look around you. What are the fastest-growing billionaires doing today? Are they building factories, or are they dining with heads of state?
George Stigler passed away in 1991, but his ghost still haunts every parliament building and every boardroom in the world. He left us with a choice, much like Morpheus in The Matrix. The blue pill: you can forget everything you just read. You can continue to believe that inflation is caused by greedy shopkeepers, that cumbersome regulations are there to protect you, and that the next election will change everything. Life will be comfortable, smooth, and full of illusory hope. But if you take the red pill, you will have something the blue pill can never offer: control. You will know how to protect your assets against inflationary policies. You will know how to navigate your career away from industries dying on the teat of the budget. And most importantly, you will never be deceived again. George Stigler, the giant of Chicago, the man with the dry smile, has handed you the key. Whether you use it to unlock the chains of your mind is entirely up to you. And as he might say, don't trust me, check the data.